stress this enough. We do not feel like we're the boss, but this is the fundamental point about karma. That's why His Holiness calls it self-creation. That when we realize we are the boss, and we think about the lower realms, we think about future suffering, we look at the world right now and see the suffering, we should be going, oh my God, I can't bear the thought of all that. Quick, please, Buddha, give me the medicine. But what we hear is blame, not fair, it's not my fault, I'm guilty, it's someone else's fault. That's the philosophical view of ego grasping. So abiding by the laws of karma, owning it, what it causes is an incredible sense of accountability, a sense of being grown up. It loosens attachment and anger and self-pity and fear, and you become a brave, grown-up, accountable person, which means a happy person. But it's not evident to us straight away, I tell you. So what I'm getting at here is this is the very first level of loosening the grip of ego grasping, loosening the grip of the self-pity me, as Lama Zopa calls it, So that's where we hear, especially sexual misconduct, and especially forget sexual misconduct, whatever, but sexual attachment. This was the point we were beginning to make yesterday. Because we see everything as punitive and blame. Then when we hear the Buddha say, don't do that, we feel guilty. We feel like he's punishing and beating us up, that's how we think. So, but because let's say, for example, with food, it's just my sort of analysis of it, because we've got so much attachment to food. Let's say food. It's one of the five senses. I mean, the putting into this mouth here is huge for us, massive. Food looms large in the minds of most people. It's attachment that most of us have got. And one of the signs of attachment is you think of it. We're going to get into the second one now, actually. We're going to get into the second one. We're kind of gradually moving into the second scope, high school, which is about where we get to the root of the problem, which is the mind, the delusions that drive this ridiculous behavior that causes future suffering. So we're moving into that one now. So when we start to look into our mind, let's say about attachment, okay, let's look at the point of the second scope now. The point of the first scope, this point I'm making here, how it leads us to realize emptiness, is that the explicit teaching about karma at the first level is simply just you behave yourself. You don't kill, you don't steal, you don't lie. Why not, Buddha? Because, sweetie pie, you don't want future suffering. That is the point at that point of karma. That's the main point there, and we need to get that one. But as we grow, is what I'm suggesting, as we practice, we start to realize the benefit to oneself psychologically of using karma as our reason, as our basis for living life. It loosens the grip of this fear, the self-pity, lessens attachment, lessens anger. That's my point. And that's loosening the grip of this primordial misconception of an inherent me. That's my point. Now let's get to the second scope. How does thinking about the delusions in the mind, the root of the problem, how does this lead us to realizing emptiness? This is really crucial to understand. This is huge, And this is what my point about I'm getting to from the stuff we discussed yesterday. Okay, so the Buddha, his expertise is the mind. I promise you, his expertise is the mind. We might not think such words. We think Buddha's this holy dude who's sitting there looking mindful all day. Look at the statue, we have these cliched views. Then we call it spiritual. So we think spiritual, and we don't think that's got anything to do with what's called the mind. That's called psychology, isn't it? Well, Buddha's your best psychologist you'll ever find, I promise. And he's a cognitive therapist. He's a genius cognitive therapist. In fact, these Indians before him, these genius Indians before him, the tradition he came out of, it's only now that we are discovering the brilliance, the incredible brilliance of these amazing minds before the Buddha. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. We arrogant little sort of Central European, Christian, Judaic tradition people, we go back to the Greeks. It's about the best we know. Well, who's heard of India? Who knows what the Chinese think? We're just a bunch of weird wacko people, We know nothing. We're so arrogant. It's now we're starting to realize. We thought it was probably Mr. Freud 100 years ago, for God's sake. Now we're realizing all the stuff that's being published with the Dalai Lama, and then the stuff that Triptan Jinpa, his main translator, and Wisdom Publications and other publishers are bringing out. Now people are seeing the incredible brilliance of these amazing thinkers. Unbelievable thinking. Philosophy, epistemology, psychology, metaphysics, unbelievable. Coming from India, before the Buddha. He went as far as he could go there, and then he diverged in his own direction. In particular, in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self, Okay, so The next level of practice, which is the essence of the second scope of practice, the middle scope, which is the part of the wisdom wing, this is where we really become Buddhist. You could argue the very first level of practice, the essence of the first level of practice, the essence of it is being abiding by the laws of karma, which is just living by according to good ethics. Good ethics is shared by everybody. A good communist would have good ethics. They mightn't call it karma. A good Christian, a good Muslim would have good ethics. So that's normal, that's common. Maybe Buddha's interpretation is different. But here now we get the second scope, the middle scope, when we get to the next level of practice, the more extensive level, of the wisdom wing. Here we get to the root of the problem, and this is the mind. This is where we really delve deep into what the mind is, how it functions. We study the epistemological model, we study the psychological model. This is incredible, and if you want to be a Buddhist honey child, honey children, you'd better study this. I'm sure, you at Jamyang Leeds are starting to do. The text is called Lorig. And, Geshe Tashi in London, those books he published in Wisdom called The Buddhist Psychology, or something like that, is exactly this text. You need to understand it. We hear the words like love, compassion, attachment, anger. Oh, yeah, I know what that is. That's kind of like, that sounds like Buddhism. But I'm a serious psychologist. I study bipolar, OCD, ADHD, ID, whatever you call it. And I'm not being sarcastic. I am, but I'm not. We think that's serious psychology. And then when we're for a Buddhist, we call, I've got an affliction. You go to your therapist and say, you've got an affliction, they'll laugh at you. So we've got to really unpack Buddhist words and stop romanticizing and fantasizing and concretizing them, and mystifying them. So this is what we learn about the mind. This is where we get to the root of the problem. Because the body and speech, which is what we're harnessing with the view of karma and ethics, they're just the servants of the mind. You've got to control your crazy servants of your mind before you can get to the real problem, which is your mind. This is more advanced. So here we learn Buddha's model of the mind, I can't see a thing. The sun's shining in my eye. Never mind. I'm sure you're all still there. I can't see. I just see a blur of light. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the mind. It's Saturday morning here, you see. It's about 9:20 in the morning, in mountain time they call it. I'm in Santa Fe, which is several thousand feet up, so it's very dry here. And it's kind of vaguely red, and all these adobe houses. They love their adobe houses here. Some of them don't even like having a paved street. I mean, when I lived in Melbourne, about 20 miles out of the centre of Melbourne, back in the 50s, there was a suburb where all the artists lived, and they had these mud brick houses. Well, it looks like that to me. And I was driving a friend around, and I said, bring me to downtown. And it looks like a 1950s mud brick place. This weird place is Santa Fe. It's like the moon. It's very nice people, though. Never mind, that's a side comment. And I've been here for 9 months, so I'm not complaining. It's a very pleasant place to be. I worked out that it's the longest I've been in one place in 30 years. I'm just usually an old hippie travelling around with my one little bag, I can't believe it. And I'm quite content. I don't even go outside much. I don't like walking much outside because you fall over gutters and rocks, I walk around my table. I've got my computer and my Tara statue, and I circumambulate my table about 1.5 miles, 2 miles a day. And I do my prostrations. I figure that's more than enough exercise. And I see the sky. Look, I can see the sky. It's good enough. I'm happy it's out there. I don't need to go and walk in it. Excuse me, my comments. Back to where we were, the mind, okay. All right, now listen to the mind. Okay, so we've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. This is a major division. This is something already that's so profound and gives us such insight when we understand it, We have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. Now, as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. So we are absolutely overwhelmed by our sensory experiences. As far as we're concerned, they are everything. We know we have thoughts and feelings underneath somewhere there. We hardly pay attention to them. But the front of our experiences, is it not? It's our senses. The millisecond, something's too hot or too cold or too loud or too this or not quite the right taste, not quite right. We're overwhelmed by it. And all our happiness and suffering is mainly starting with our sensory experiences. And we don't analyze, we don't distinguish between the sensory and the mental. And if we can even get this clear, it's a revelation for us in understanding the way Buddha describes and how we can begin to then unpack and unravel our minds and know what the hell is going on inside our minds, So What's so fascinating, sensory consciousness is actually really profoundly limited in its capacity for cognition. Mind for the Buddha is that which cognizes, or is aware, or knows. The definition of mind is to know, to be aware, or to cognize. That's its job. And the entire job of being a Buddhist is to sort the mind out. Because the mind, Buddha's telling us, is full of rubbish, full of misconceptions, and they're why we suffer. So we have to sort out the misconceptions, we have to sort out the facts from the fictions. This is what being a Buddhist means. This is actually what being a Buddhist means. We're now getting to actually becoming a Buddhist. We're preparing our body and speech in the first scope, controlling our body and speech, beginning to loosen the grip of ego grasping. Now we start to get to the root of the problem. So sensory consciousness is like a bunch of dumb animals with respect to animals. Eye consciousness can merely see, I'll use the same example. Where's my, never mind, I can't find something. But this thermos, it's my thermos, okay? And I see this thermos and I'll tell you it's a very nicely designed thermos. That's my opinion. That's why I bought it online. I checked for the nice thermos, right? The design. So then we'll assume that my eye consciousness, my eyeballs, in fact, are seeing a nicely designed thermos. Well, that's a load of rubbish. I'm sorry. First of all, sensory consciousness, which is that part of your mind, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeballs and the nerves and everything, all working nicely. That has a cognition. The eyeball is not what sees. The nerves are not what sees. The consciousness, which is not physical, combined with the eyeball, is what enables you to have a cognition of what? When you put that here, I will say, I see a well-designed thermos. No, you don't. What your eye consciousness is cognizing precisely is shape and color, and that is it. It doesn't even know the name of the shape and the color, but that's all it cognizes. It's profoundly limited in its capacity for cognition. But look what happens. Anthony, turn your thing off. Mute yourself, Anthony. There he goes. So, what's going on then? So you have to ask the question, if my eye consciousness is what is cognizing me as shape and color, you have to ask the question, what part of my mind is cognizing a well-designed thermos? Well, guess what, honeys? That's called your mental consciousness. And that's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. That's where all the thoughts and feelings and emotions and psychosis and love and bliss and joy and hate and dramas are. That's where the workshop is. That's what we have to become familiar with. So already this is a revelation. So what's happening, and this is not a joke, it is a joke, but it's not, it's accurate, the millisecond my eye consciousness gets this cognition of shape and color, in a millisecond, and I mean it, quicker than Google, I promise, up comes the concept from my mental consciousness, oh, what a well-designed thermos. So in other words, the mental consciousness at the level we function at is a bunch of billions of conceptual stories that we are so programmed with, many of them, that we come into this life fully programmed with our conceptual stories. So if you come into this life programmed with attachment to sex, let's say, you're born as one of these little monkeys or chimpanzees or one kind or other that I heard about, the programming in its mind so strongly of, let's say, attachment, and we're going to get into all these things, the millisecond it comes out of its mummy's womb, it turns around, has sex with its mummy, and then it's daddy, and then mummy and daddy and sister and auntie and uncle and brother and grandparents. They're very open-minded because the habit is so strong, and that's the way the mind functions. We learn that, we should begin to learn that in karma. That everything we think and do and say does not go astray. Everything we think and do and say stays in our mind as a memory and programs us. This is a technical thing. This is how we create the universe, Buddha says. So, we come into this life programmed. We do not get them from our mother and father. This is the part we've got to learn about in karma. We might be like our mother and father. We both might like eating chocolate cake. You both might be good at music. You're not good, my mummy was a classical musician and people all said, oh, Robina's good at music because her mummy gave her the genes. She gave me genes, yep, but genes do not contain the consciousness. So I was good at music because I'd done it before, and my mummy was good at music because she had done it before. She came into this life program with her being good at music. I came into this life program with being good at music, and I conveniently, and out of great good fortune, and I created the cause, to be born to a mummy who could help nourish my music. We bring our own stuff with us. This is the point about karma. So here we're discussing just the habits of past karma. Now we're talking about the mind that does the job of creating those habits. So our mind is, or even just forget about past life. But I'll say past life. Coming into this life programmed with past habits. So that little monkey, whatever it was, created the cause to have that kind of monkey mind, monkey body, created the cause to have this intense attachment to sexual activity, intense attachment. So, we might have attachment to food. Most of us have got that. That's our habit from many past lifetimes. We come into this life fully programmed at the first second of conception. We don't come in as a blank slate. So all our mind, so everything we've seen and done and thought and said and whatever, 99% of which we don't remember in just this life is programmed in our mind. It's in there, So the millisecond I see this, out comes an opinion. A concept is an opinion based upon my this, my that, my habit, what I thought over the years, blah, 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 and out it comes. Now, we don't think it's an opinion, do we? We think it's a fact. And not only that, we think it's a fact existing in the thermos. All of these are the consequence of all these habits and these delusions. So you have to unpack the technology of the way the mind works. It's totally fascinating, I tell you. I mean, scientists would love. What's happening now? Maya. Yeah, that's it. You mute yourself. I'm being like a policeman here this morning, aren't I? Catching everybody. So we've got to understand this. So all these thoughts in my mind, and because they're habitual, and they're programmed in my mind, I've developed this, and I come immediately, then of course I make the mistake of thinking, because it happens so quickly, I don't realize my senses are doing one thing and my mental consciousness is doing something else. I think they're the same thing. So when you look at your beautiful new boyfriend and you're in love with your new boyfriend, it's exactly the same thing. You just look at that shape and color and you nearly faint with joy. That's not coming from your eyes, I promise. It's coming from the mental consciousness and all your extremely exaggerated opinions about the boyfriend. But they all come instantaneously. So even just this alone is a revelation, We give so much power to our senses. And of course, this is happening so primordially. It's all in a millisecond. And I really mean it. It's quicker than Google. Quicker. This is how programmed our mind is. And we're not talking the brain here. We're talking the actual subjective, non-physical cognitive process itself. And this is the job of being a Buddhist, to unpack and unravel this. So now, okay, how do you divide? There's thousands of thoughts, aren't there? From the second we wake up in the morning till the second we go to sleep. There are thousands of these conceptual stories all raging on. And so Buddha divides them into 3 categories, which is very, very helpful. Only 3. It's amazing. You look into some psychiatric volumes, it's not going to be divided into 3 volumes. The negative ones, the positive ones, and the neutral ones. It'd be very convenient if it were. It's such a simple model, but that's Buddha's. So all the negative, neurotic, deluded, ridiculous ones, the ones that they call afflictions, that's a Tibetan word and it's a Sanskrit word. But interestingly, it seems to me in our culture, we don't use that word every day. And Lama Yeshe, he's amazing, Lama Yeshe. I never praise enough. He's unbelievable how he was able to talk to people like us. At the time when he first met foreigners, was Western hippies, in the late 60s, early 70s. And he was absolutely brilliant in his ability to convey Buddhism to us. So when I edit his books, I'm almost in tears because his effort he made to communicate with us. The typical word for these neurotic states of mind, we all know it, we read Buddhism, it's called affliction. Affliction is a great word. You look up the dictionary. It's a problem. It's some kind of suffering, And at least Geshe Sopa, when he does his Lam Rim, he calls it mental affliction. We're getting closer. But still it's an abstract word for us. Well, I'd rather call them mental illnesses. This is very shocking for us. So the first category are all the mental illnesses, the mental afflictions. And they're all the voices of the root affliction called ego grasping, which we've talked about. They're all the voices of that. But he narrows them down to 3. The 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions. Ignorance is the root one. Then that gives rise, the misconception of a wrong self gives rise to attachment to get what that self wants, which then gives rise to aversion, the panic attack of aversion when attachment doesn't get what it wants. It sounds so cute, it sounds so simplistic, but it is profound when we can understand this, So, attachment is the so all this is now we're getting to the point. This is particular. There's 2 main functions of these neurotic states of mind. They're the first category. The second category are the virtues, the positive states of mind, the valid ones, the reasonable ones. And the third lot are the mechanics of the mind. I call it that, like concentration, good memory. We won't discuss those here. So the main ones we're occupying with, the one that seem to fill our head, to fill out all our roommates. The neurotic ones, the depression, the attachment, the anger, the low self-esteem, the jealousy, the fear, all these dramas, they loom large in our head, don't they? They're chatting away all day. They're the voices of the root delusion, ego grasping. And then you've got all the virtues, love, compassion, kindness, goodness, but they seem to be in the background. They're not. I've never met yet a person who says, Robina, I can't stop thinking good thoughts all day. I do not meet a person like that. The Bodhisattvas would, but they wouldn't admit to it. But we are, the negative ones loom large. And this is the tragic thing. So there's two main functions of these neurotic states of mind, delusions. Lama Yeshe, in his book Mahamudra, I identified 21 synonyms, half of which is made up, and some of which are typical in the text. He never used the word affliction. He just knows it was a dumb word, It's very fascinating. The word delusion. So there are two main functions of all these unhappy states of mind. One is they are disturbing. Check that, you can prove in half a second. Check the last time you were angry, jealous, anxious, worried, depressed. You were definitely disturbed. Clearly they are disturbing emotions, are they not? It's so obvious, and we live in these. Now the other function, and this is the one I want to point out, because this is the one that begins to really, again, prepares us, not begins, but prepares us to understand more clearly ego grasping, the root delusion, which we deal with in the 6 perfections at the final stages of university, the Bodhisattva path, to really begin to understand emptiness. When we understand this function of the mind, this is a crucial one. Now again, the explicit teaching here is not about that. The explicit teaching here is to see how hideously disturbing these delusions are, how horrible attachment is, anger, jealousy, how it causes us so much pain. Again, not you're a bad person, which is how we hear it. No, the doctor's trying to get you to see that you've been living with this pain all your life from eating sugar and you never realized. So you've got to become familiar with that pain and be completely sick of it so you can give up the causes of it. That's what the Buddha's telling us. But our minds are imbued with these delusions. I'm trying to make us feel depressed. They are there constantly. They're like the voices behind everything. Even our goodness, which is there, which is our saving grace, they're polluted and dragged down by the attachment and the aversion and the fears and the dramas, So because we don't know anything else, it's hard to point it out. So that the main characteristic, the explicit teaching in the second scope of practice, is to become disgusted by attachment and anger and jealousy, meaning not in a punitive religious way, like you're a naughty girl, which is again how we hear it. No, by the suffering it's causing you. This is what we just really miss. We hear it as bad, guilty, I'm a bad person, naughty, I'm attached, I'm angry. We hear it as so heavy. We hear it wrongly. Buddha's not telling us that way wrongly. He's not saying it that way. We hear it that way. Now, the implicit teaching, like I'm talking here, is this other one. The other function of these unhappy emotions is that they are delusional. This is, interestingly, in other languages, like in Spanish, I think, affliction they use a bit, but they don't say the word delusion. It's very arcane. But in English, delusion's a great word. If someone says, "Your God, she's so delusional," you'll be really offended because you know that they're accusing you of living in La La Land. We understand that, but this is what Buddha's telling us. It's so clear. Sorry, people, the extent to which you have any attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, anxiety, and the rest is the extent to which, one, you are disturbing, but crucially, the extent to which you are delusional. This is the most powerful one to begin to understand. When we can understand this function of these branch delusions, this prepares us easily to get to see the real function, the function of the root delusion, which is really stressed at that point, how it's a misconception. So the other point to get to here is this is quite shocking for us, to really comprehend, as I've indicated it already, that we live at we've got two modes, two ways that our mind functions. One way is you're describing, we've got sensory and mental. And now let's look at the mental consciousness, which is where the workshop is. There are two levels of ways it functions. One is conceptuality, thoughts. The other is called, actually, in Buddhist psychology, it's called perception, which is a regular word, but the definition of this is very precise. We can only access that level of mind when we've got single-pointed concentration, when we've got shamatha, when we've gone beyond conceptual and beyond the sensory. So, of course, that's pretty abstract for us. We don't have anything like that in our modern psychology or neuroscience. So it's pretty abstract. So this subtler level of mind, which is non-conceptual, which is non-discursive, which is much more powerful and more direct and more clear, and that's where they say that you have where you get actual realizations of the reality of things. All of which sounds pretty abstract to us, So, but we live at the grosser level, which is conceptuality. Now, that's a big surprise, because what we would think is, up here is conceptuality, which is when you learn theories and musical theory and mathematics, but here, this is emotions, and we see them as completely separate. Well, what's totally fascinating, Buddha says they're all conceptually based. Concepts are thoughts. Now, this is not too complicated. If I'm in love with Fred, I don't have any Fred there, but never mind. Let's say there's a Fred there, and I'm in love with Fred. The states of mind that are involved, the main one is called attachment, which is under the neurotic heading. And this is its point now. All of these neurotic states of mind are disturbing, number one, but number two, they are conceptual states of mind. They are viewpoints. They are opinions, but because they're so intense, they are so primordially habitual in us, but their key function is that they exaggerate. Now, we know this. When you're in love with Fred, you know that he appears to you as the most divine person in the entire universe. You just faint even at the thought of him. You nearly faint with joy when you see a photo, not to mention the real Fred. That's a function of this state of mind called attachment. The key function of all delusions is that they exaggerate. And this, when we can understand this, we can understand our minds, we can understand Buddhist psychology. And we can understand how to realize emptiness. I promise. So all the delusions exaggerate. So attachment, what does it exaggerate? It exaggerates the deliciousness of something. So in other words, if you've got attachment for Fred, the story in your mind, we know this, is completely out of control. Day and night, you can think of nothing but Fred. Your mind's completely berserk. We know this. And it's totally exaggerating Fred's function, Fred's job to make me happy, and then we write this novel of the next 80 years, I mean, it's completely out of control. We all know it. But it seems so shocking that the Buddha's suggesting we shouldn't have it. It just gives us a panic attack because we think it's called pleasure. But this is another discussion here, and there's no time for this. But pleasure is not the same as attachment. Pleasure, happy feelings, which are what we're wanting, is in the third category. It's neither good nor bad. But we want the pleasant feelings, and what we believe is that Fred is the cause of our pleasant feelings. And then the attachment comes in and makes him look so delicious and divine that keeps me buoyant in this insane story I'm writing. So the delusions exaggerate. They are conceptual stories. But because, like for that monkey, who, when he came out of his mummy's womb and turned around and had sex with her, you would say, well, that's just instinct. Well, exactly. What do you think instinct is? Instinct is the word we use for something that happens naturally, that's kind of in your bones. That's exactly right. But where does it come from? Not the moon, from having done it before, baby. If you can play the piano perfectly, virtually you're an instinctive musician by now. But didn't come out of nowhere. You practiced really hard for the last 20 years, baby. But we come into this life already programmed with anger and attachment and whatever our habits are. Some of us, indeed, we have good habits as well. How miraculous. Because we've practiced them before. That's what instinct means. So the monkey doesn't sit there and think, oh, I'm going to get all excited and think about my mummy and try and get my penis up. No, it just happens. Because of the programming in the mind. We're all programmed. We're virtually like lemmings. We just program with our past habits. And because we just follow our feelings, we don't analyze them, so we just lead ourselves into up-garden paths and into nightmares, So we've got to unpack and unravel this process. It's an incredible job we have to do. But the key point I'm making here is when we start to realize these disturbing emotions, their function is to grossly exaggerate certain characteristics of the object. Each of them has its own job, really precisely. So depression is internalized anger, okay? And it exaggerates your badness. Overt anger exaggerates someone else's badness. Attachment exaggerates something's goodness, something's deliciousness. It could be the cake, could be Fred, could be killing, it could be anything. So now back to my point about yesterday when we were discussing the way we're very punitive about these things. And because you see, the other thing about these delusions, they exaggerate, but also what we tend to do, and we can see this. And we mentioned this yesterday, I think. Let's say your mother starts, no, not with somewhere else. But let's say your boyfriend leaves you for a younger version. Let's say Fred leaves me. I'm in the middle of being in love with him. I'm completely just totally divine, heavenly Fred, the answer to all my prayers, my soulmate, and then he leaves me for somebody else. It's beyond shocking, isn't it? So 1 minute, Fred is the most divine person in my eyes. I can only see good qualities. If I wrote a book about him, I wrote a one-page description of Fred, it will be the most divine person you've ever seen in your whole life. Now how do I see him a week later once he's left me? Once I've got over the broken heart, I'm now full of rage. And how does Fred appear to me now? Because anger has now replaced attachment, and now all I see is the ugliness of Fred. Now, but listen to this. Fred did one bad action. He left me. Okay, quite strong, quite a big action, I agree. But that 1 month or 6 months that I knew him, you probably could count 150, 200, 300 good things he did for me. But the moment he leaves me, I take that one bad action and I paint the whole of Fred with that brush. That's what delusions do. They grossly exaggerate and then they blind us from all the other qualities. So now, because let's say I'm using an example of food and then of sex, two of our major attachments, Not everybody's attached to music. Not everybody's attached to seeing nice shapes. But look at food and sex. We call it sex. I don't know who invented that ridiculous word, but whatever it is an attachment in the mind for usually it's for bodies, isn't it? The bodies. And like I described yesterday, where do you think penises and vaginas came from? That's karmic evolution of individual beings over many eons of time, or hundreds of thousands or billions of years, from a previous experience of being human when we had subtle light bodies and no gross delusions, but the delusions were still there because we hadn't realized emptiness. But degenerate times come, and these gradually, we get more deluded, attachment begins to grow, it pollutes our wind energies, which is our subtle physical energy, and eventually one day or other, a few million years ago, or whenever it was, we suddenly find ourselves being born on a planet looking like a bunch of apes. It's degenerate times, baby. And what have we got? Penises, vaginas, and these 5 holes that Jamyang feeding. They're not made by some creator. They're not coming out of nowhere. They are the product of attachment. We created our own bodies. We created, all the things that we love and hate and are attached to and not attached to. We create all this from our habits. There's no creator up there running the show. We do it. This is the cosmic joke. Attachment runs the show. Attachment is the cause of this entire universe. So certain attachments, like what we call sexual, and strong attachment for contact with the body, strong attachment for contact with this sense with food, let's say. So because those intense attachments, when we exaggerate them and we have a lot of emotion around them. Now look at the emotion around vegetarianism. Look at the emotion in the world. There are certain facts, I agree, the meat industry is destroying the planet, you can't argue. But look at the emotion around vegetarian. And I find it a bizarre idea, but that we define ourselves in terms of what you put in your mouth. What a peculiar attitude. We divide the world, you're a vegetarian or not a vegetarian. In other words, according to one kind of habit you have in your life, you're defined in that way. That's what delusions do. We define ourselves in terms of a race. We define ourselves in sort of what kind of music you like. That's what delusions do. They separate, they concretize, and they're good or they're bad. How rude that anybody should know what food I put in my mouth. What do you mean, am I a vegetarian? Mind your own business, Now look at sex. And this is why the drama around sexual misconduct, because over the centuries, we've developed as cultures, and our religions do the same thing, this intense, fanatic obsession with, you're a homosexual. As soon as we get fancy, we use Greek words. It's so ridiculous, I mean, the discussion with Paolo was very interesting last night, so I looked into it, and I haven't got all the answers yet, but I will. But I mean, in the end, even if we do look at the sexual misconduct one, certain conducts the Buddha is suggesting in order to subdue our attachment. This is the point behind it. Your doctor will tell you certain things to do to lessen your attachment, to lessen your ingesting of sugar, because that'll cause you suffering. So Buddha's the same thing. When it comes to certain habits, when it comes to certain vows, they're to help you subdue your delusions. They're not. But what we have done over the centuries is say you are evil. So you burn someone at the stake because they did this, or look at all the men who've been accused and harmed because they're called homosexuals because they have a thing that they stick in an anus instead of a vagina. I mean, we're ridiculous. We exaggerate everything. That we did that. So when we hear, Buddha giving advice about this, best suggest for you to calm your attachment down. Don't do this and try not to do that and try not to do that. But we see it as monstrous. We hear he's abusing us, he's criticizing us, he's calling me evil. Don't be ridiculous. I mean, I know hundreds of people who are homosexuals among Buddhists. No one complains. We're not perfect. Buddha says but because we exaggerate is what I'm getting at. We exaggerate. And now I'm completely dark. Now I can see you, but not me now. That's okay. So it's very fascinating. Delusions do this. And over the years, we build up these stories. Homosexual, heterosexual, black, white. Look at the way we label and divide. This is delusions. The job of our delusions does this because we exaggerate certain qualities and then we set them in stone and then we say that is who you are. This is the nightmare of what delusions do. I mean, no wonder we're all out of our brains with suffering. And we do it with ourselves. I did one bad thing and I want to kill myself. I mean, it's completely insane. But this is the function of delusions. They exaggerate. And then they concretize. So, and how rude of people to dare to ask where you put your penis. Mind your own business. I mean, excuse me being so blunt, but get my point. But this is what we do, So there's no talk in Buddhism about homosexuals. I don't think they had such a term. When Buddha was talking back then, he was talking to a bunch of lay people, a lady and a gentleman with a family, Calm your attachment down, dear. Whatever he said. And then later on, there are commentaries, and that was what I was looking into as a result of Paolo's question. But it's such a drama for us. Anyway, this is all about delusions. It's how they function. They exaggerate, they distort. I mean, we really are living in La La Land. This is what Buddha's telling us. And so learning at this level of practice to start to see the disturbing character of attachment, anger, jealousy, that's amazing. So you calm your mind down. But then we begin to see this deeper level, the way that they're delusional, they're conceptual stories that we're very familiar with, and they exaggerate. So we have to unpack and unravel this crazy mind of ours, get to distinguish facts from fictions. And this is what brings happiness. This is what brings bliss, joy, contentment, fulfillment. Are we communicating, people? I always shout. I can't believe myself. I do it. So I'd like you to ask me some questions now so far. I've said a lot of stuff. And given that I talk 3 times the pace of everybody else, it's now about 3 hours later, even though it's only 50 minutes, okay? So ask me some questions. See if we're communicating. Ask me some questions.
Hi, Robina.
Hello, Catherine. Sweetheart. Hello, how are you, Catherine? So happy to see you, darling. You doing well?
Happy to see you. Pardon?
You doing well?
Yeah. I just had the sunshine on me for a few minutes.
Yes, there you go.
Not quite as much in Manchester, I'm afraid.
Go on, talk to me.
I kind of know the answer to this, but I just thought
good.
It's the thing of, the 2 things that you're talking about. The sexual, not misconduct. The fact that the monkey. Yes. Immediately wants to start, doing the business.
Yes.
And eating.
Yes.
And of course, really, those 2 things, if human beings didn't do those 2 things, I mean, obviously, some of us prefer, just to eat and not bother with the sex bit of it. But,
sure.
But generally, if those 2 things...
Yes.
I mean, I get it's to do with the exaggeration.
No, what's the question?
Well, I'm talking about we need both those things to happen for survival.
Okay, right, but Buddha's not honey child. Buddha is not. His goal is not to help us to survive. His goal is to get the hell out of samsara and give up attachment and anger and become a liberated arhat and become a Buddha and benefit sentient beings.
Yeah. I kind of knew the answer, but
That's
I just
right.
thought I'd bring it up.
So then the point is, though, Sweetie Pie, as you're on the Bodhisattva path, Catherine, the very first level of practice, which is junior school and high school, this is a Theravadan level, we're discussing this here yesterday and today, we've got to see the garbage that we do, see the misconceptions, see the suffering, see the pain that we're causing, and want to give them up. We've got to do that. And then we've got to realize emptiness. And then once we're out of all the rubbish, I mean, we do emptiness later, and then you add the Bodhisattva path to it. You're out of the rubbish, honey, but then you'll keep coming back as a Bodhisattva, but it's water off a duck's back, and you'll get bliss from your sex, and you'll get bliss from your food, but there won't be any attachment. You'll be doing it for the sake of others, and you can get the best of both worlds. So look forward to that.
Okay.
You understand?
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
See, can I just ask you very quickly, is Geshe Sharab there in Santa Fe?
He is. Yes, he is. He's here, yeah.
Yeah, okay, it's give him my love, please.
I will do that, definitely. I will.
Okay, thank you.
All right, darling. What else, people? Questions? Any old question?
I have a question, Robina.
Who are you? Where?
Aline.
Hello, darling. Talk to me.
Hi. Well, when you talk about in other teachings, how you transform neutral activities or activity into Dharma activities.
So I'm missing your point, sweetheart. Say it again. I missed your point. Sorry, darling.
For example, when you say you're washing the dishes and you're transforming into a Dharma activity, so you make a motivation for it.
Oh, yeah, that's the Bodhisattva path, but that's fine. Talk about it here.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So my question is, how can I transform having sex into a Dharma activity?
Oh, my God, it's easy. Why is it? The very fact that you asked that question indicates you exaggerate the importance of sex. Right there.
Absolutely.
It proves it.
Yes.
It proves it. It proves it. It's if you analyze all of these actions, any action that's driven by attachment, what it does is exaggerate the deliciousness of the object, and therefore we exaggerate the importance of the activity, and that means it looms large in our mind all the time. And even the way, I mean, and then also because it does, this is the interesting point, we have to understand the relationship of pleasant feelings and getting an object of attachment. Because in our experience, the way we're programmed, the extent of the pleasure that is triggered in our mind when we contact whatever object it might be, right? If it's the cake or the body, whatever it might be, or even the killing. I mean, I remember I always quote this, I remember an Australian journalist who lived in England. He was the arts writer for the Time magazine for like 40 years, the American magazine, and he's dead now, an Australian journalist writer. And he had extremely intense relationship with fishing. And he talked about the first time he went trout fishing, it was like a cosmic experience. Now, hear those words. So the point about this is very clear in Buddhism. The extent to which you get any pleasure triggered in your mind upon contact with whatever object it is. For you, it might be a boy's body. I've got no idea. For someone else, it might be a piece of cake. For someone else, it might be music. For someone else, I mean, all depends on the degree. For him, it was killing fish. Listen to this point. The extent of the joy that is triggered equals the extent of your karmic connection with it, the habit of it in your mind. There's the little monkey. The second he comes out born, he turns around and has sex with his mum. So the habit, the strength of the habit of a connection with something is the extent of the attachment, which makes it look totally divine, equals the extent of the pleasure that is triggered. Now, we all want happy feelings and we all don't want suffering feelings. So the job of attachment throughout our life is to find the object such that when we have contact with it, pleasant feelings are triggered. Now, pleasant feelings are in the third category of states of mind. They're neither negative nor positive. They're simply the way we're made. It's not a negative or positive thing, but we conflate attachment and pleasure, and then we get all guilty when we hear the Buddha said we should got to give up attachment. Oh, I've got to give up my pleasure. I've got to give up my heart, as Lama Zopa says. No, they're completely separate states of mind. So, and then because all this guilt, this incredible guilt and rage around sex. I mean, I'm not trying to be political here. I'm a radical lesbian separatist feminist. I mean, 45 years ago I was. But it's imbued in my mind, the political view of things, that when we hear about, sexual violence, we get so angry. And so, there's so much energy, and this is from our past karma of hundreds of lifetimes. There's so much guilt around something that brings pleasure. That's why there's all these restrictions and it's sin, and it's this, it's that. There's so much drama and vomit around it all. So when we analyse whether it's a cake or a body, all you're talking about is the extent of the pleasure. So there's no argument. Contact with a delicious body definitely triggers delicious pleasure. Nothing wrong with the pleasure, baby. So when you're beginning to understand attachment and you've got a relationship, of course, it's impossible to control the energy because we're so out of control. But at least if you understand a little bit about emptiness, it has no intrinsic nature. It's your mind making up this nonsense story. Already that loosens the grip. And then when you're going to have sex, at least you add some compassion and kindness and generosity and want to give that person pleasure, be happy to make them feel happy. I mean, then you can loosen the grip of the garbage and the guilt and the shame and the drama. Do you see? It's logical. Anything can be transformed, sweetheart. Maybe you don't go around killing too many people, okay? That one you stop. But if there's a mutual relationship and you're in a relationship and you're kind and loving and compassionate to each other, then you add your compassion, loving and kindness. I mean, this is always sounds so shocking in relationships, but the reason we do anything that gives us pleasure is because we feel like it. So the moment if you're tired and you can't be bothered having sex and your partner feels like it, oh, I'm tired, darling, that's seen as a valid reason. Well, if you want to be generous and kind, you can't have sex with them. Just because you're bored, just because you don't feel like it, is no logical reason not to have sex. In the same way that a person invites you out for dinner, you've already eaten your dinner out of compassion for the other person, accept their meal. So there's a way of an attitude towards it that's to do with kindness, love, compassion, but you've got to add ethics to it and discipline, and don't be berserk and don't be out of control and don't have wild drunken sex because you're just abusing yourself and others. That's why ethics doesn't contradict having pleasure. Are you with me, darling?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Good. Got to analyze all this stuff, you know. Go on, people. What else? What else? Anybody else? Okay, that's fine. So let's keep talking then about how delusions exaggerate, because this is the key point here. This is what's leading us to understand emptiness. So, you know, the root delusion, which we'll talk about tomorrow, the root delusion is known as ignorance, literally ignorance. It's got a very specific function, and it's the deepest lie, the deepest exaggerator. It not only, so for example, attachment to my black, well-designed thermos, the attachment in the eyes see shape and color, my intelligence remembers it's called thermos and blah, 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 I can put the story together, but attachment kicks in immediately and makes that thermos appear back to me through the lenses of my attachment, which means it looks delicious. And then so attachment is a liar insofar as it's an attitude, a viewpoint that I have made up that I dump on the thermos. Now that's the main voice. Attachment is the main voice of the root delusion. So this root delusion, what does it exaggerate? That exaggerates the very ontological status of delicious thermos, as if it's in the thermos itself. And all these delusions work hand in hand, you know. So the root delusion exaggerates the very status of the thing that you're observing, whether it's a delicious cake, ugly boyfriend. So the anger exaggerates the ugliness of the boyfriend. The ignorance informing the anger, underpinning it, exaggerates the very status of the ugly boyfriend, as if ugly boyfriendness is in the veins of the boyfriend, flowing there along with his blood. It looks out there, appearing back to me as if I'm this innocent victim. There's this ugly boyfriend. Of course I have to be angry. There's that divine, delicious chocolate cake. Of course I have to be happy. That's how the ignorance functions, and they all work together. So the Buddhist psychological model, it's got these thousands of different names for the different states of mind. I mean, there's a particular text where you study 51 of them, and you can narrow them all down to these 3, but they're very precise. We're talking not pieces of the brain here. We're talking actual moments of cognition. And that's the skill and the brilliant skill we have to develop. So we need concentration to be able to hear and see these thoughts every second, all telling their story. So basically our head is full of these thousands of conceptual stories, but they're all running with each other, on top of each other, flowing in and flowing out. And the only time we begin to notice them, and this is the tragedy, the only time we notice all these conceptual stories is when they get to the level of the body and then get to the level of feeling. And it's too late. And then we have all these notions about them, make all these romantic stories about them, you know. So we're really living in la la land. We really are literally delusional all the time. Buddha's saying this. We're delusional in our world when you really think you're Mozart. That's when you're seriously a problem. Buddha says, no, you're all delusional. It's a question of degree, that's all. And that's not joking. That's a very accurate statement for the Buddha. This is why you've got to first control the body and speech, which are the servants of your delusions. Now you can get to the actual job in the middle scope to start to unpack and unravel this chaos in there, to see what the hell is going on, so to know why you're suffering, and then to argue with these conceptual stories because they're not set in stone, to unpack and unravel, to distinguish between the facts and the fictions in our mind. This is the job of being a Buddhist. Okay, everything we do leads us to this. Ling Rinpoche, young Ling Rinpoche, I think he came to Leeds, didn't he, Lynn? Often I've noticed people tell me that I hadn't heard this before, but he often says it. And I heard it in London, I heard it in India when he taught. And he says, because, you know, Buddha talks, we always hear about Buddha talking about 84,000 distinct different mental problems. And he said 21,000 are rooted in ignorance, the first of the three delusions, the root delusions. 21,000 are rooted in attachment, the second of the three root delusions. And 21,000 are rooted in anger. And then the other 21,000 rooted in all three. So it's a really elaborate, coherent map of the mind, which is really, really fascinating, you know. And this is what we have to learn to unpack and unravel. Because eventually, when you're a Buddha, everything leads you to becoming a Buddha. And what's Buddha? Bud, the etymology of the word Buddha is very tasty. Bud implies the utter eradication from your mind of all delusions. Why? Because they're adventitious. They're not at the core of your being. They're fantasies. They're made up nonsense. And second, da implies the development to perfection of all the virtues and goodness and intelligence and wisdom, because they are at the core of our being. They are who we really are. So that implies the methodology, doesn't it? Being your own therapist, unpacking and unraveling your mind. But you've got to control the servants of the mind first. Control your body and speech, calm it down. And that's why it's not punitive, but we hear it as that. So if you hear maybe the sexual misconduct is, sleeping around, and you've all been sleeping around all your life or something, and you wonder, then you feel, how dare they say I can't sleep around? Who do they think they are? Like you're going to get punished if you sleep around. We've got to understand the reason behind it. Like your doctor says, don't eat sugar. You don't think, oh, my doctor's going to punish me. She says, no, I'm not allowed to have sugar. She's so mean. You've got to see the reason why she's saying no sugar. And you've got to look at what Buddha says. And if what Buddha says is nonsense, you don't accept it. For God's sake. He's not a punisher. He's not a rewarder. He's trying to give his experience of how we can calm down attachment, because attachment is our main problem. We don't think it is. That's his analysis. Attachment runs the show. So we've got to start where we are, learning to realize that first it's a delusion that exaggerates. What does it exaggerate? The deliciousness of things. And basically, attachment, again, like I always talk about, it's multifaceted. It's totally programmed, primordially deep from countless eons of lifetimes. And we come fully programmed with it, And so depending on our karmic connections, it's what objects we meet that trigger the pleasure. So what's Brian W. asking? Lynn?
I haven't got anything in chat. Were you wanting to ask a question,
No,
Brian?
There was a question. It came up and the words came up. I saw something. What was it, sweetheart? Was there a question? Anyway, he'll say it if he wants it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on. Talk to me.
Yes.
Good. Talk to me.
Thank you, Robina. Thank you. My question was, what kind of questions should one ask themselves when meditating on a specific attachment? Was there like a process of questions to really hone in on it?
Well, Brian, it's a bit, okay. That's a massive question, because I can enter into it in 7 different ways. So I don't really quite get, you've got to maybe explain a little bit more by what you mean by meditate on it. So just give me a little bit more scenario that you're imagining in which you would do something like this. So what do you mean? Say a bit more.
I guess, I know I have a detachment. Like when I think about, obviously, sex.
Of course, yes, all these different things. That's right. You're like the rest of us. Join the universe.
I have an attachment, like I have long hair, and I've had long hair for a long time. And
so you attach to your long hair. I understand. This is exactly how we are, Brian. We have certain activities and certain things and certain events and certain habits and certain objects that we are very familiar with. We get into a pattern, don't we? So yes. So first of all, I think, okay, the first answer to your question, Brian, it has to be this. It has to be, well, you've got to first ask the question, what is attachment? So that's surely, if let's say that's the first thing. You've got to know what Buddha means by attachment. And first of all, the word attachment, like you just said then, and we use it that way very loosely. I've got many attachments. You're referring to the object. But here we've got to realize that attachment, as you know, of course, is an attitude in the mind that interprets those objects. So the point about attachment, my answer is, the more familiar you are from reading the literature, from listening to teachings, the more you're familiar you are with what attachment is and how it functions. And then as you're listening, you'll go, aha, I recognize that. Oh, that's interesting. I recognize that. And then the more you study it, in other words, if you've never heard of nutrition before, ever, never heard of nutrition, what's good, what's bad food, as you study it and then you relate that study to the way you eat, you're going to get a revelation. Oh, now I understand what that means. Yes, I do that, and yes, I can see that. So the answer to your question is keep listening to the Buddhist teachings about what attachment is. And then whether you're on your cushion or whether in your daily life, you're going to start to go, wow, I recognize that. So let's talk more about attachment, and you'll recognize. So attachment is this multifaceted, okay? The most primordial level of attachment, this sounds a bit abstract initially to us. This is from having practiced attachment all the time. From past lives. We come into this life and the strength of this suffering is quite severe for most of us. It's called dissatisfaction. That whatever we've got, it's not enough. Whatever I get, it's not enough. What I achieve, it's not enough. How much your girlfriend tells you she loves you, it's not enough. It's the default assumption is not enough. And when we have that in a severe way, which as Lama Zopa says is one of the worst sufferings in modern world, it turns into ourselves. I am not enough. And that's self-loathing. This is the irony of it. It's the result of constant attachment. Because attachment is the energy of, if you don't feel like you're enough or have enough, that's always that feeling of a dissatisfaction. So then you think, well, what am I going to do to fill up the gaping hole? So then you go to the chocolate cake, you go to get this, you go here, you do that, you jump on a girl, you look at the pornography, whatever it is that you're attached to due to your past karma, you go fishing, you torture somebody, whatever your habit is. And the assumption of attachment, the next level of attachment is that it brings the hunger. So first you've got the dissatisfaction. Then there's this feeling of, well, there must be something out there that will make me happy. So you go to get that object, and then when you get the cake, we're just on autopilot. We don't analyze it much. You go to the cake, and there's a huge assumption there, like this perky anticipation. Oh, wow, the cake will do it. And you get the cake in the mouth, and after 5 pieces, what happened to the pleasure? The pleasure was there, but you kept eating because you're never satisfied. And then eventually you vomit because you don't know what, because you ate too much cake. So then you're going to try something else. So attachment is dissatisfaction. Then it's this constant hankering after something. And then it's the anticipation of getting it. And of course, threading through this is the total exaggeration of the deliciousness of the cake, the deliciousness of the habit we've got, the deliciousness of the long hair, and therefore the total panic of not having it or not getting it, or when you get it, what happens? It gives rise when, as soon as you don't get it, as soon as someone cuts off your hair, as soon as someone takes your cake, as soon as you don't get the cake, then the third delusion arises, and that's anger. Or aversion is the bare bones state of mind, which is the response when attachment is thwarted, when it's a response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Then aversion, and that's got a whole spectrum as well. Anger, volatile anger, is the obvious expression of aversion. The milder levels are just irritation, annoyed, frustrated, anxious, worried, upset. We live in this. This is thwarted attachment, and we're talking second by second by second, not just gross moments of it. And then internally, if you're a more quiet type of person, eventually it builds up because nothing goes astray, everything gets stored in our minds. Eventually it manifests as profound depression. This is samsara, Brian. So the more we can see that pattern, that you recognize it in yourself. So then what do you do with it? Well, this is where disciplining our body and speech, let's say you're attached to eating too much cake, or you're attached on, maybe whatever it might be, Brian. I mean, we're all the same. We've all got the objects of all got attachment to objects of the senses. This is the first level of attachment. Not everybody has many of them. Not everybody has them intensively. Some people have them in really unbearably strong. You've got to jump on 22 girls every day, and it's never enough. I mean, with food, my trip has been food in my life, and as my mother used to say, and it would blow my mind, I'd try to understand it. I remember it vividly, and she's agreeing with Buddha, you know. She said, the more you get, the more you want. And this is the essence of why Buddha says attachment is suffering. So we've got to analyze that. So there's one way it manifests, like you said, you've got your long hair, and we're all set in our ways, aren't we? We do things a certain way. We mightn't be so much attached to having 22 girls a day, but we are very attached to our ways of doing things. We're very set in our ways. That's attachment. And then kind of stubborn and solid, and we freak out when things don't go the way we want. We can see we've all got this. This drives all of us, Brian. So the more we understand this, the more you catch it. So then what do you do with it? Well, you know, if it is, this is why the very first level of practice in karma, Buddha doesn't say don't eat 17 pieces of cake. He says don't kill. He doesn't say, you know, don't do, I mean, all these actions harm us, but the heaviest ones are also ones that harm others. So at least we control our body and speech and refrain from actions that harm others. They're the heaviest ones. But then we can extrapolate from that any actions we do driven by attachment or anger are going to harm me. So for our own sake, that's why we have to learn discipline. So if you know a person's into, like a person I know does 5 hours of video games every day, he's not harming anybody else. But what's he doing to his own mind? Making himself completely berserk, never stopping. You think about it all the time. You get distracted. You can't do your job properly. You can't pay attention to other people. It makes you completely self-centered. This is the point about attachment. Buddha's telling us that it's breaking our hearts. It's causing us such suffering. But on the face of it, it looks to us that following attachment is bringing happiness. So we've got to analyze it and unpack it and start to see it. So then we start the discipline of giving it up. It's very painful. Just like we all know, if you're a junkie for alcohol, we know that nobody in their right mind would expect you to give up attachment for alcohol while you continue to drink alcohol. That's demented. So we all know we've got to give up the object sometimes. So maybe you've got to stop the 5 hours of video games. Otherwise, you've got to do cold turkey maybe. You've got to stop the alcohol because it's so severe. Then the real work starts of giving up the neurotic states of mind, the fear of losing it, the constantly thinking about it, the panic of not having it. This is the work every day, Brian. I'm sure we're communicating, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Keep moving, darling. Just keep moving, keep looking, keep listening. You know, it's like learning. It's like you're studying nutrition and you can learn it more. We're talking mental nutrition here, and it's Buddha's approach, you know. So keep thinking about it, and then you'll start to go, yeah, I recognize that. And slowly, slowly, honey, slowly, slowly.
You know, I just wanted to say that one of the things that I have renounced is I'm a big pot smoker.
That's right. I knew you were. Of course you were. I was too.
And I'm 53 now, or 51.
Okay.
And I just, since I've been into Buddhism, and it's been a very short period of time,
yeah,
I renounced it.
Good.
I had some time, and then I went back to it.
Okay.
And now I just renounced it again.
Yep.
And I don't want to go back to it
Good.
ever
So
again.
you're learning. So this is it, Brian. This is a process. You're learning. We learn about these things. We learn about, you know, we learn about.
And
we learn.
The other, I just want really quick.
Yeah.
With my hair.
Yeah.
With the hair.
That doesn't
I've
matter. Your hair's
noticed
fine.
a lot
Huh? What?
that I get this feeling that I want to shave it.
Don't be extreme. Well, it'll grow again, so don't worry. But I mean, don't get too emotional about it. Just let it be there until you have to shut up, and then when the time comes, maybe it'll just be cut off or whatever happened. Don't worry about it. And that's what happens with attachment.
Like it's going to do something for me, though. That's what's weird.
What, darling?
Like
what? Say it again.
I feel like it's going to do something.
Well, it
for
might.
me.
Maybe you got some karma to be a monk. Who knows? Maybe you're leading towards being a monk. You never know. But don't get too carried away. Keep it quiet. Relax. Okay. Go easy going. But it's like any attachment, isn't it? I know when I was a little girl, and I used to suck my thumb till I was about 12, I think. And the agony I would go every day in bed, agonizing. Will I suck my thumb? Won't I? I mustn't suck my thumb. I will suck. I mean, it's like a nightmare. So that's what happens when we get too obsessed with the thing. Sometimes just tell yourself to shut up and relax, you know. And then it'll kind of find its own level. Anyway, keep moving, babe. You're doing well.
Thank you so much.
Good, Brian.
Namaste.
All right, darling. What else, people? 10, 17. What time did we start? 9, 10. Oh, okay, we're fine. Okay, good. Keep questions. Any more questions, people? Yes, Susie. Yes, sweetheart. Unmute, babe. There you
I
go.
just want to say to Brian, I have exactly the same thing with my hair. I want to shave it all the time.
There you go.
And I know I'll look ridiculous, but I'm just obsessed with it.
Okay. I know I had hair down to my bum. So then when I became a nun, I shaved it off. It was, and I've been shaving it for now a long time. So anyway. Yes.
Rabina, I have another question.
Yes, Catherine.
When somebody becomes the object of somebody's extreme aversion after attachment.
Yes.
The dealing, or maybe if you see it's happening with me, but more importantly with my nephew's ex-partner.
Your nephew's ex-partner. So people are angry with her, you mean?
Yeah, well, he's left her and two very small children.
Okay, he's
doing all these things like, accusing her, getting the police to go around accusing her of, stalking him. All crazy
this is quite
things.
difficult, isn't it? This is very difficult, yeah. So what's the question?
Well, the question is, I kind of know how to deal with it for me, although I've had, lots of things he's done and it's been very difficult. And, I pray for him and I understand why it's happening. But for her, because she doesn't have, she's not into Buddhism.
No, I understand, darling.
And it's helping her to see, I'm trying to help her to see, understand it.
I think don't do too much trying to give her lectures about things. Just love her and
No.
support. No, I don't mean it like that, Catherine. Please forgive me. I didn't mean it like that in a bad way. I mean, the main job, your job, it seems to me, is now to protect her, to make her feel protected, and to do whatever you can to stop this wretched bloke from harming her. I mean, fine, she can change her mind, but, get out of the danger first. Stop the alcohol first. You can't, it's sort of don't talk too much about the attachment until you got rid of the alcohol. She's got to find a way to be protected, and you can make her safe, and she's got to do what has to be done in the world to stop him from doing this harm, I mean, that's the main point. I mean,
okay.
it's very, then she can start to deal with her mind. But my feeling is your main gift to her, you've got to be like a rock of Gibraltar for her. She's got to know that you're there for her. She trusts you and loves you. You're close to her or not?
More and more now, yes.
Okay, good. That's your main job. Don't tell her about how to deal with her mind. Just help her. Be a confident, calm, steady, and just that alone is the most profound gift you can give her. She's got to know that you're there and totally trust you. That's a profound gift. And then she'll rely on you more and more. And as it gets a bit safer, you'll be able to be more helpful to her. That's my feeling.
Yeah. I mean, it's really alarming to see how quickly, with my nephew, his attachment turned to aversion. It was almost overnight.
I believe
it was unbelievable.
No, I know. It's very shocking, isn't it?
Sad as it is, it's now a really good example.
Yeah, that's
for me
right, darling. Precisely, it is. Exactly,
how
that's
quickly
right.
it can happen.
That's right. Exactly, that's right. Your main job now, even isn't to understand him. It's a good example, but you've got to protect her and get her to be. I mean, do everything you can to make her feel safe. That's your main job right now. Just love her for who she is, and so she'll feel calm and know she can rely upon you. That's so important. I can't stress that enough.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabina.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else, people? Okay, so the main... Yes, go, Alina. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Yeah, it's just it might be silly, but it's just because we've been talking about hair. I always wanted to ask you this. Why do monks and nuns have to shave their hair?
It's just, darling, it just all comes from some... the time in India when Buddha gave up his royal lifetime, at that time, among all the upper class Indians, maybe all Indians, they had very elaborate long hair. So the whole point of giving up his fancy clothing and giving it to his horsemen, cutting off his hair, was just this symbol of giving up that lifestyle. So it's just become that, it's just that meaning. There's nothing intrinsic in it. There's nothing inherent in it. It's just that's where it's come from. Giving up, it's a tradition, it's a symbol of giving up the lay life. That's all. That's all it means. It's a symbol of renunciation.
It's part of your vow or not?
No.
The hair.
No, I don't
No,
think so.
okay.
It's there. It's in all it's in the habit. I don't know where it's all written down somewhere. It's just the tradition's passed down, I mean, everything's like that. What you learn how to eat your food came from your mother, you track it back to 4,000 people ago. Everything's like that. It tracks down. And the key point is not to see it as an intrinsic kind of you do or don't do, to see the meaning behind it, I mean, for years and years, I was living in London when I was working for Wisdom Publications. Doesn't matter, it was in the 80s. And I decided I wouldn't look like a nun. I had hair and I wore lay clothes. That's just, so I mean, it's like, it's a decision you make.
Okay. So you could technically right now, because you are in the ropes, but you could have some hair if you wanted. If you really wanted, or that would be frowned upon.
Darling, everything's like that. It's all like that. That's why you've got to look at the reason you don't. It's like you're saying you're learning how to play. You're learning how to be a piano player, and you're asking, why does the teacher say that your elbow has to be this shape? You're asking that question. Well, are you allowed to put your elbow down? Oh, you mean you could put your elbow down? Well, of course you can do. You're the boss. But there's got to be logic in why you have your elbow that way. What's the logic of why I've got my hair done? Why this logic of why my clothes are this way? But we set them in stone. We see them as inherent. They're not. They're dependent arising. Do you understand?
Yes. I keep wondering how I would look if I ever become a nun, because I think it's a possibility.
Well, then if you're thinking about, worried about how you're going to look, you're not ready to be a nun.
I'm trying, Robina. I'm trying.
Shush. One step at a time, baby.
Yes, I'm getting there.
So you and Susie and Brian will come one day with your bald heads.
Yes.
So the bald head is just an external thing. I know you know this, baby, but just it's the mind, the wish. Okay, one step at a time. So what you got to do is think. If whatever's most beneficial, may I do it? If it's beneficial for me to become a nun, may I become a nun? And then leave it there. Don't chew it like a dog with a bone. And if it is the right thing and the karmic seed is there, that aspiration every day will nourish it. And then one day you'll go, there it is. And it'll just be the most natural thing to do. Do you understand? Good, darling. Okay. So what we're looking at here, in general, the explicit teaching here is to see the disturbingness of attachment and anger and fears and jealousy and depression and anxiety and be sick of the suffering. Be fed up with it. Be sick of the suffering. And that's the point. And the first level of practice, control your body and speech. That's the explicit practice. The implicit one, like I said, which would come naturally from resulting from the working with the law of karma, is you become more content, more fulfilled, less neurotic, less blame, less guilty, less shame. And the next level here, the explicit teaching, is control the craziness, the disturbingness, and be sick of the suffering of attachment and aversion and jealousy and the rubbish. And you learn to more and more take responsibility, stop blaming the boyfriend and blaming the outside world, which is pretty powerful, which is pretty easy to do, to really take responsibility and know that you're sick of this crazy emotional turbulence. But the deeper meaning, as I'm putting it, the implicit one, is starting to realize the reason why these unhappy emotions are unhappy, are disturbing, is because they're liars. So let's say we can look at this, because this really gets us to prepare for emptiness tomorrow. You listen to this, it's so fascinating. It's like for countless years you've believed that 1 + 1 is 3. No, a £5 note's a £50 note. Just a simple example of a misconception. Anger is a misconception. It exaggerates the ugliness of somebody. It doesn't mean they didn't do the action. Yes, that nephew, never mind the nephew, that bloke did leave you. That's a fact, but anger is this interpretation on top of that fact that makes it much worse than it is. Anger exaggerates. It's a liar. It's a misconception. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness. It's a liar. It's a misconception. So because it's a misconception, so it's like the same. If you believe that £5 is 50, every time you see £5, you actually see 50. And then think about this. You would then anticipate you're going to get £50 worth. You go out shopping all excited, getting your £50 worth. And you go to the checkout counter and she says, I'm sorry, you've got to put 90% of all this back because it's only got £5. So what do you think the response will be? Think about it. This is not cosmic. You'll be bitterly disappointed. You'll be angry. You'll be upset. You'll be shouting. You'll be yelling. What do you mean? It's 50. And she'll say, no, you're wrong. Well, that's why we suffer. Attachment believes that Fred will make me happy. Attachment believes that Fred is divine. Attachment totally anticipates all this joy and happiness for the next 80 years. Like I always quote Nicole Kidman when she was with Tom Cruise, and I love the woman. I'm not trying to be mean about her. When I read an article years ago in Vanity Fair, when she was still with Tom, we will be together until we're 80, she said. Attachment does that. It runs mad and makes up fantasies. Does not mean you should then give up and think, oh, well, Tom will leave me today, I might as well not bother. No, that's nihilism. We exaggerate. Attachment exaggerates, and it's running berserk in our mind every second, default mode. So, of course, if you believe you're going to be together till you're 80, if you believe he is totally designed from his tip of his toe to his toenails, then of course you'll get disappointed when you see a fault. Of course you'll get disappointed if he leaves you when you're only 50. You'll be absolutely devastated. So you're not devastated because he left you when you're 50. You're devastated because you expected him to be there till you're 80. So it's a disconnect between reality and what we see is reality. That is why we suffer. And you can forget that £5 note isn't 50. Again, tomorrow you believe it's 50. And you bash your head against walls. Buddha says we've been bashing our heads against brick walls for countless lifetimes, believing in things that don't exist, quite literally. So it's a hard job to unpack and unravel these lies. And not chuck the baby out the bathwater, because we've got the virtues there, the goodness and the love and the clarity and the intelligence and the kindness. And they are not liars. They are valid. So the delusions are the source of our pain. You're not suffering because you didn't get £50 worth. You're suffering because you thought you should have got £50 worth. You're not suffering because your boyfriend left you. You're suffering because you thought he shouldn't leave you. That's the point. It's your attitude, your viewpoint that's a mistake. But we're so addicted to these viewpoints, we don't realize we even have a viewpoint. We just believe the person. So you're going to sue the cash register lady because she didn't give you £50 worth. You refuse to see that you made a mistake. That's why we all go mad. To add this to karma, you've got the nuts and bolts of a Buddhist practice. Yes. Yes, Kimberly. Hi, sweetheart.
Hi, Robina. Good morning.
Good morning.
I was thinking about what you said about Lama. I'm not sure if it was Lama Yeshe or Lama Zopa Rinpoche. But you said that perhaps one or both gentlemen thought that a state of attachment was akin to being in a septic tank.
Oh, yeah, that's Lama Zopa. When we've got Renunciation.
And I really want to feel the septic tank. I really do. And I'm just wondering, I'd like a little shortcut to the septic tank track.
Kimberly. Honey child, if you already know that attachment is like being in a septic tank, you're a pretty advanced yogini and I wouldn't worry about you. You're going in the right direction, baby, so persevere.
Well, I don't know about that, thank you. But
just keep practicing, keep working, keep understanding. What, darling?
Sorry, I was thinking about the sex trip.
Yes.
And I'm like, I guess I'm 48 and it's drifting away, this whole situation, this whole trick of nature of love and romance that was always to me a trick to make me have babies. And I did. I had 3.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So I did it. And but I'm still married.
Okay.
So I have to work with my situation. I love my partner.
Yes.
And this is really personal, but I was experiencing like a slow motion orgasm situation, and I could see the attachment that builds. It's like this wild attachment that builds. It releases into pleasure. And I'm wondering, is that attachment, like, I know we're not supposed to be thinking good or bad, but I'm like, well, it is a little bit kind of creepy actually to me, or I thought it was. And then I'm like, well, I'm in a marriage and I want it to be a happy one, and I understand the generosity aspect, but what if you just pick up a little bit of attachment and illusion and some fairy dust and just kind of let that stay in the mix, because it keeps kind of happiness there. Is that
okay,
wrong?
darling? I think the key to sorting out what you're saying is if we're using Buddhist analysis of all this stuff, which of course is what we're doing in this room, then you need to understand more the nuts and bolts of what is happiness, what is attachment, what is love, all these pieces of you mixed together in this relationship. So I hear that you have love for your husband, which is an amazing quality. You want him to be happy. You have generosity, you have compassion. They're virtues. That's incredible. That means you practice patience. That means it's so fortunate. Then there's also attachment involved, which includes certain activity. So the thing is, but the crucial point is when you study the Buddhist psychology model more in depth, you're going to realize attachment is under the negative heading, which is the exaggerating, the fantasy, the neediness, the emotional hunger, the neurosis. Then you've got in the virtuous character, you've got the virtuous heading, you've got love, which is good. And then in the third category, the mechanics of the mind is just simply the bare bones function of a mind within a body like we've got. When certain things occur, pleasure is triggered. When certain things occur, like you know from your own experience, pain is triggered. triggered. So they're just feelings. Pain is one thing, pleasure is another. So pleasure is neither good nor bad. Pain is neither good nor bad. I mean, they're neither negative nor neurotic. They're not negative and destructive in their nature. They're not valid and virtuous in their nature. But when attachment kicks in, that's what makes us a junkie. We all want the pleasure. So attachment is like a vampire, that if it's mainly attachment you had for your husband, you'd eat him up for breakfast, and then when he stops doing what you want, you'd chuck him out. But because you've got love and compassion and virtue and patience, then it's a good relationship and you're making the most of it, darling. So you see your mind, you lessen the attachment, you lessen the anger, you lessen the depression, you lessen the blame, you grow the love and the compassion, the kindness, and then you get more pleasure from that, because that's what you're doing. You're growing yourself as a human being. So delight in your marvelous practice, and you're purifying by having all this ridiculous suffering. So it sounds to me you're on track. It's just a question of knowing how to define all this and label it correctly so you know you're on the right track. But it sounds to me you're on the right track, baby.
Yeah, trying to work it out.
That's right, and that's by studying. It's like you've got to, you're hearing music and you've got a good feeling for it, but you've got to study the logic of the music. You've got to study the nutrition to understand it. Here we're talking Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy, which is the method I'm using to, this is my job. So this is the one I'm using to help understand myself. And if you like it, you keep studying it, so you'll put all these pieces of yourself together and you know how to interpret each piece and not get confused. Do you understand, sweetheart?
Yeah, I understand.
Good.
I'm still, I guess I'll just have to have some mystery and just keep looking into it.
Well, I don't know about mystery. I don't like to use it. Mystery sounds like romantic. There's no mystery. It's only mystery when you don't know it. When you know it, then there's clarity, and then there's courage and no fear. When you know something, there's clarity and courage and no fear. So just keep unpacking and unraveling, sweetheart. It's a doable job. But it sounds to me you're really on track. You've got a lot of good qualities. You're doing really beautifully, Kimberly, I must say. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much. I'm really into it. So.
Good, darling. Well done. Good. Keep moving, sweetheart. Okay, bye. Not bye. Hello. Who else then? Come on. It's 10:30, 9:30, whatever. It's 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 6, whatever it is for you guys.
Hey,
all right, darling. See you soon, sweethearts. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Think about, analyze, contemplate, whatever we've been talking about. So we'll carry on later. Thanks, darlings.